Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Spirit Plant Medicine World. Anybody out there on Facebook and wherever you might be in the digital world watching and tuning into this broadcast. My name is Mark Curran, and today I'm here with my very special guest, Aryshta Dean. Now, I hope I said your name right, Aryshta.
Aryshta, yeah.
Aryshta.
Aryshta.
So I'm really honored to speak with Aryshta. She's going to be one of the coming speakers at the Guy in Mind Psychedelic Conference in Portland on July 20th and 21st. And Reverend Aryshta Dean is the founding director of the Sacred Foundation and is a retired Silicon Valley executive and ordained minister and a modern-day priestess of Isis. She's the co-founder of the priesthood of Nefertum and ministry dedicated to the recreation, education, and sacred use of the Blue Lotus Sacrament. She's a graduate of the Center for Sacred Studies, certified end-of-life doula, former medical assistant, Reiki master, and shamanic practitioner with over 50 years experience in the field of entheogens. During the past 7 years, she's traveled extensively, researching the history of the religious use of entheogens, and is the author of the forthcoming book, Priestess of the Blue Lotus. Welcome, Aryshta.
Thank you very much.
Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you.
So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. We had a little conversation before we got on today about Blue Lotus, and you shared some things that kind of blew my mind. And I'd really love to know more. But let's start with your story from a ex Silicon Valley executive and things of that nature to where you are today. It's quite the stretch.
It is quite the dichotomy of a story. I joined a mystical school in 2003 after retiring from my Silicon Valley job about 2001, 2002. And I had been a business consultant towards the end of my career. And so I joined this mystery school in the Sierras, and then over the next 7 years, was able to really begin my journey into a mystical life, and eventually ordained through them. It's been a slow process. I must say that it has been an amazing journey of learning the spiritual and sacred use of entheogens. I've had some truly amazing teachers, and some of the main people in the world, and both indigenous and Americans that have been some of my teachers. And so I've been able to learn many of the traditions from the South American to the Native American, but along the way I had a mentor that said 2 magic words to me, and they were Blue Lotus. And there was something that just triggered inside of me, that it was as if I'd always known. It just was like a gong in my head and in my heart. And so since that time, I have traveled around the world twice, and spent a great deal of time I spent 3 months on sabbatical in Greece, and I've been to Egypt, and in chasing this mystical plant that was at the core of spirituality for at least 3,000 years before Christ. So it has a tremendous tradition across not only in Egypt and the Mediterranean, Greece, but into China as well, China and India. So it is a fascinating story that I'm excited to bring to the world.
Yeah, it's, you know, as we talked previously when we got on, I was really intrigued with Blue Lotus, and one of the things where I saw it was a Netflix documentary on the Pyramid Code, and they had talked about it, and it was quite fascinating. So maybe you can share with us some of the history and how it was being used, and you know more about Blue Lotus.
Yeah. So one of the origin stories, the mythology about the beginnings of the universe for the Egyptians, was that out of chaos and out of nothing, there was a mound of earth that grew. And a single flower grew out of nothingness, and it was the blue lotus. So the origin story of the universe for the Egyptians was closely tied to the flower, and that is because for about 1,000 years, the three main gods and goddesses of the pantheon of Egypt were Sekhmet, Ptah, and Nefertem, and their son Nefertem. The Egyptians believed that the blue lotus flower was a god. It was Nefertem. So the incarnation of this god into the real 3D world was in this flower. So from the historical mythological standpoint, that how could a flower have so much significance to a civilization that they would believe that a deity actually existed inside that flower? So this was the first clue. Um, uh, there are representations of the blue lotus on every temple and every tomb throughout Egypt. It is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and uh, it frequently these flowers are seen draped over jars. The flowers are held up to the nose, and so the early Egyptologists and archaeologists, especially from the 1800s, thought that this was the flower of perfume. Anybody who smelled one of these flowers, and I've been to the fields where they've grown, they have very little scent. That's not a perfume flower. And so there was another symbology about holding this flower up to the nose. And the key that we have to that is that in other representations, when a pharaoh or a noble person dies and their tomb is uncovered, frequently you will see where a deity, their patron god or goddess, is granting them everlasting life. And the way that they do that symbolically is that the Ankh, the Egyptian key of life, is being held up to their lips and nose. So they are clearly receiving something, through the mouth. So if we as human beings, we go, well, how do we receive things? We breathe through our nose and we eat and drink through our mouth. So this is the portal into our bodies, right? Into our souls,
Mm-hmm.
as a physical representation. And so the key of life being presented to the opening to the mouth is that receiving. So similarly, my theory is that the blue lotus flower being presented to the face is not smelling because it didn't have a lot of scent, but it's receiving the blessing of the god Nefertem. So how do you receive a blessing of a deity in this flower? You're going to eat the flower, or you're, in this case, going to drink a sacred sacrament made with the flower. And hence, that is the reason that we see representations in Egypt where the flower is draped over the jars. If I wanted to tell you symbolically what was in a jar, then either the flower or grapes or some kind of indication symbolically draped on the jar would then tell us, oh, that's what's in the jar. So we see this representation of blue lotus flowers draped over jars everywhere. And I think the Egyptologists, because they were so terrified of the idea that the ancient Egyptians were using entheogens, were using drugs to be able to make contact with the gods, that they just couldn't see it, and they weren't about to ever publish or to acknowledge the fact that, yeah, that's what's in the jar. So, yeah. So there's
Well,
now I could go on for hours talking about the history, because it goes all the way into Rome and to the final days of Rome. But I'll keep some of that for my book.
yeah, for sure. I find it interesting that sometimes we relate plant medicine as a drug.
Yeah.
I met someone one day, and she made an interesting reference. She said, when you take something green and make it white, it's a drug. We do things with a natural plant as a medicine.
Right.
It's a very different thing. So what's the difference in your?
What's the difference, in my opinion?
Like from a drug to a medicine, especially when it's plant based and
Well,
processed or things of that nature. There's that stigma to the word drug.
Yeah. I think that I'm going to take it from the historical perspective, if I may. Let's talk about opium. Let's talk about the poppy. Poppies, first of all, are in the ancient Greece. You'll see the representation of the poppy on everything. I mean, it's as universal as in Egypt, the blue lotus flower. In Greece, the ancient Greeks, poppy is on everything. It's everything has poppies on it. So it's from an entheogenic historical standpoint. They were the ones that really culturalized the use of opium. Now, opium is it is truly a narcotic in the fact that it numbs you. It is great for if you've got broken bones, if they're doing surgery, if you need to be knocked out. But it is truly in the term of drugging you to subdue you, and to put you into not so much an altered state, but a numbed out state. So to me, drug is associated with this idea of putting you under, to put you out, to affect the body. So a definition of medicinal drugs to affect the body is completely different than a spiritual religious use of an entheogen to be able to produce an altered state where you're a higher consciousness, not a lower consciousness, not an unconscious state or a physical state. An entheogen refers to something that's taking you to a higher plane. And so for me, that is the definition of where you talk about plant medicine / entheogens versus drugs. So because our society for 1,600 years purposely tried to take entheogens away from individuals, because we didn't want people to have a higher vision of reality. We wanted the dogmatic view of the social order to take precedence. We didn't want people to have their own individual experiences. We wanted it by the book. So that's the way it's been for 1,600 years. And so to me, behind, and it may have not even been a conscious expression of society, but I think the unconscious expression of the powers that be during the drug war was they didn't want people messing around with their consciousness. It wasn't that they were afraid. They were afraid, all right. They were afraid of people waking up. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So anyway,
that's interesting, because there is kind of really a mass awakening happening, especially our Western world, and I'm
There
seeing it in
is.
our community here in Vancouver. And I think one thing I want to thank you and acknowledge you for the work that you do, because so many people need, the guidance in their awakening because they don't know what's happening.
Right.
You
Exactly.
know, I did an interview with a radio program last year, and it was really kind of woke me up to a different perspective where the whole concept and the belief was so many people are getting diagnosed with mental illness or actually having spiritual awakenings, didn't know what was happening, thought they were going crazy, go to a doctor where they would drug them, suppress everything, numb them out, and they didn't get the transformation that journey um, really allows us to have our own awakening. This is why I think throughout history that the benefits of having a guru or a spiritual teacher or someone to guide you through that really made sense.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? You are a reverend.
Yeah. Because I've been on this journey now for like 17 years. And by the way, I had zero medicine experience before coming in through the spiritual door. So I have virtually no experience from a recreational use of any medicine. For me, it is all about the spiritual, religious use of these medicines. Yeah, the social malaise that we're faced with as a society, the incredible frustration of people in their daily life of having a hopeless, helpless feeling in the world that and then because we have no because our acknowledgement of the divine is changing. All the charts are showing that the organized religion, the popularity of organized religion is on this incredible downturn. The old religions don't have the explanations. They don't have the appeal. They're not answering people's questions. And I believe that the rise of the entheogens, of the rise of the medicines, the legalization process in society is a direct indication that the turn has happened. We've turned the corner as a society, and now that people really want that direct experience. They don't want to be numbed down, and yet they go to their doctors, they go to their therapists, and they're handed a pill and say, this is your only hope, is just to numb yourself, to just to blank out the pain and the suffering. Entheogens offer you exactly the opposite, is that you have that oneness with the universe, you have that oneness with the divine, you can attain a mystical experience, and it's exactly the opposite of what society is offering. So I think we're seeing truly, this awakening. To me, is an evolutionary jump. Is that we're looking at something that literally hasn't happened in about 2,500 years. That we're going to see a quantum leap in our ideas about reality, our ideas about civilization, our ideas about our relationship to the universe. We are standing at that precipice right now. So.
And what a beautiful place to be in. I'm really honored myself to be really a messenger, a conveyor of information. People such as yourself, your message. And if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, I would have had no idea the path I was going on. The medicine took me
I never imagined that this was certainly a wild dream, but I never imagined that we'd be sitting here today and say, wow, psilocybin is legal in Denver and legal in Oakland. And it was like, yes, we can bring this back now.
Well, yeah, and we have cannabis is now legal federally in Canada
and in Mexico.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. It's a little.
So there's a tremendous, and of course all of our Democratic presidential candidates, almost I believe, and you can correct me, but I believe every single Democratic candidate has said it's time for federal legalization of cannabis at that.
Yeah.
So I think there were 31 or 32 states for medical and 11 for recreational. So that's 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 60% of the country for the states. So it's time.
That's great. And in Canada, they did it from a recreational perspective, and Vancouver was always a hotbed of medical dispensaries. People just kind of looking the law, doing it anyways, and right. Pretty much turned a blind eye. And BC has been so well known for their
it is in the United States as well. Though those states that have medical, it's like anybody can go get their medical card. It's like it's kind of just kind of a joke.
But it's a beautiful place to be now. At least it's changing.
Yes.
Stigma around cannabis and even psilocybin. These what we refer to as medicines are being recognized for their healing abilities and healing.
Exactly.
And that's a beautiful place to be. So let's go back to Blue Lotus.
Let's go back to Blue Lotus. Hey,
yeah, I don't want
look what I have here. I want to show this so I could get the light here. Yeah, there we go. So, try to get okay. There's Nefertem. So he's depicted as this god with a flower on his head, and that flower is the Blue Lotus. So he is the deity associated with the Blue Lotus. So talking about the awakening and talking about how things are changing as a society, and what is this awakening, and is this awakening supported by Mother Earth and whatever you want to call goddess? The interesting thing about this story is that Nefertem fully came back into our reality in 2010. I was honored to be the very first person to ferment Blue Lotus again after this last 1,600 years. Up until now, people have just taken dried flowers and thrown them into a jar and pour some wine over the top. I mean, it's alcohol soluble, so you need, people go, oh, make tea and stuff. Honestly, you're getting a placebo. It is the aporphine and the nuciferin is alcohol soluble. So you've got to put something in there to get that extraction. But up until 2010, that was as far as it had gone. And my guidance was, hey, if this is alcohol soluble, then why aren't you fermenting it? So the first thing we did was we made wine. I was living in the Alexander Valley, and I had access to organic Pinot Noir grapes right next door. So I was able to make myself and my wonderful assistant at the time, we made wine, and began to experiment with that to see if it was potentiated, and then how was this going to react? What was this going to do? By itself, it's barely detectable. I mean, typically what it'll do, the Blue Lotus by itself is what they call a hypnotic. It'll put you into a mellow state. It's really good for guided meditation. It's good for meditation in general. It's good for dream state, but it's so subtle that many people don't even feel it at all. So it wasn't until 3 years ago, 2016, and I literally was holding a ceremony for myself for my birthday, and where it was the first time that I had the opportunity to combine psilocybin and Blue Lotus together in the same sitting. And I was blown away. It was the most amazing thing I had ever experienced. And I have some experience. And this was something really unique. And then all of a sudden it hit me, is that that the Blue Lotus is a catalyst. It changes the dynamic, it changes the shape of the DNA of the neural receptor that's responsible for our psychedelic experiences. It binds in the DNA and elongates that branch of the DNA. So the uptake of the in this case psilocybin is slightly different. And what it actually does is pretty much guarantee you a mystical experience. Are you there?
I'm here.
Wow.
How long? Let's see. It wasn't that strange. It's interesting
Um,
when I work
well,
with energy people, interesting things happen.
indeed. And also I noticed that if I start talking about things that perhaps I shouldn't be talking about, is like, well, okay, we'll just get cut out. So I'll use
Yeah.
that as a segue to change the subject.
Well, that's okay. I love what you were talking about, though, because it's interesting how these things, how when you combine a couple of different things, the alchemy makes such a big difference.
Anybody that's experimented with various different strains of cannabis will tell you is that, okay, great. So this is cannabis sativa, but how it's grown, what the strain is, an infinite number of variables will change the experience of that cannabis when you smoke it or when you ingest it. And people now are used to talking about the entourage effect with cannabis. Well, the same is true for combining entheogens together to be able to provide an entourage effect. So getting back to the subject about the mystical experience is that I now have evidence that pretty conclusive that the priesthoods had been able to experiment over thousands of years to be able to provide a combination of entheogens that would literally guarantee the user a mystical experience. So that's the magic here, is to be able to provide a portal and a direct channel to the divine, to the gods. And so to be able to, one of the things I tell people is in the ancient world, there were no books. I mean, there were no divine, word of God. Is that if you wanted to have a conversation with the gods, the priest or priestess would probably hand you something to drink, and they'd say, go out to that field and go talk to the gods yourself. It's not for me to tell you. It's like, you go talk to them. So I think that what's really important about this, when you get back to this idea of the social awakening that's happening right now, is that's what we yearn for. We want direct experience. We don't want somebody else to tell us. We're tired of that. And it's like, that's the old world. And so the explosion of entheogens, the legalization of entheogens, is this yearning in the soul to be able to have this direct relationship with the universe. And then you decide how you're going to play that out. And it's like, it's not for some higher church to be able to dictate to you anymore. I mean, we've grown beyond that.
So do you feel that people can have this experience without entheogens?
Certainly, the mystical experience is been sought after since the beginning of humanity, for at least 10,000 years. and that we have records of it, that people have been seeking the mystical experience, this oneness with God and the divine, from fasting, the ecstatic dance, twirling around, spinning, the Sufi tradition, the extremes of whether it be intense sensation, the legends of the monk sitting in the snow, meditating, all in the attempt to be able to induce a mystical experience. I mean, our vision quests, the Native American traditions of any kind of extreme where we're altering our environment and our sensations in our body to be able to induce a mystical experience. One of my favorite teachers once told me, it's like, you can sit in meditation on top of a mountain for 20 years and you'll get there, or you can take this. It's like, yes, this one has a slippery slope, and you really have to manage your chemical encounters with the divine and the mystical experience. But this is the shortcut.
Yeah, and I love it's a very natural based approach. God give us all these beautiful animals, plants, just our own creation.
These aren't artificial. These aren't man-made. These have been here from the beginning of time.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing, and that's why I always think it's interesting. Like, who is anybody to illegal nature?
Well, that was the whole political movement that's been going on in Oakland specifically, but now to launch into California for the 2020 election is the legalization of nature. Is like, how can you criminalize nature? It's like, what?
Yeah. Crazy. So what exactly
these
speaking
things
about at guy in mind?
So specifically, I want to talk about the mystical experience and how the Blue Lotus can, in my research in the last 3 years, with the entourage effect of the Blue Lotus with other entheogens, I've been able to literally a high percentage. I don't want to say what the percentage is, but a much higher percentage now than just psilocybin by itself, that we can induce a mystical experience. And so, I want to talk about why or how that happens. What's the chemistry involved? Pretty much kind of know what that is now. The research has been done on aporphine and necephrin and the entourage effect, and so I want to be able to talk about that. I want to talk about the history of that. This has this amazing history that goes from the early Chinese, and the ancient Egyptians into Greece, and then finally into Rome. It wasn't until the Dark Ages that all this disappeared. Mankind's known about this for a very long time. So I want to be able to bring the history in. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the chemical aspect of it. And then where are we going with this? I mean, how is this? What does this provide for us as a civilization? And how is it? It's very interesting is that all of a sudden this has reappeared. I find that is not a coincidence. I mean, I didn't go hunting for the Blue Lotus experience. It came to me, and to other people as well. So it's like, to me, that there is an intelligence behind this. There is. I am at a loss of how to really define that in 21st century terms, other than the old-fashioned way of saying, there's kind of a spirit behind this. There is an intelligence, and there's a reason that the ancients said that there was this God, this deity that was inside this plant. So his reappearance into the 21st century is, to me, not coincidental. And I think that that's vitally important to the human race, that it's time for us to evolve. It's time for us to take the next step.
Mm-hmm. Beautifully said. Well, Aryshta, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank
I
you.
so much appreciate connecting and learning from you. And